Hi there, this is YouTube MASTERCLASS. YouTube MASTERClass has given us the permission to teach a COURSERA class, which can be used for undergraduate or graduate credit that will someday hopefully become a minor program at Harvard, which doesn't have a film school, but that doesn't say any less about how the academics there are above the standard of everywhere else on Earth, and I really owe them thanks for letting me fill a spot for their film program and also letting me complete their comparative literature program, which I appreciate about them, that they take the top scholars, and if you're a top scholar you can't really refuse them. That USC has the best film school in the world is undoubtedly an honor of mine to say that this class can be used for Coursera USC credit. That the USC credit is commuted through Coursera also to CalArts, which I can't do anything without CalArts. I mean, they test you on every level of the arts. Dancing. Have you ever had a moment in dancing that you were achieving over what the rest of the dancers were achieving? I mean, it's very competitive. You have to have 12 novels, 12 full-length features, under your belt that have to be for real companies, and it can't just be we help kids at CalArts with their art shows when they're kids, but when you're an adult and you're applying to art school, even to get the master's, you already have to be proficient in all the arts. You got to be a good painter, or at least understand what makes a great painting great, and how symmetry works in Renaissance paintings, for example. And I'm just saying that there's these art forms that you have to know about. You have to have 12 musical albums if you're into music, and you have to win awards of every kind, like a Pulitzer that I had to get a Guinness book. That you have to have degrees beyond degrees to get a PhD at CalArts is interesting, because the same quest has almost been required for master students, but there's a shortage in that since been going on for certain years when the pandemic hit, and then other things were delaying the progress of artists in general. We had a lot of material come out and finally turned into CalArts, so our portfolio was beyond 12 apiece. We delivered 100 movies to Warner Brothers, just put their logo on all of it. But I'm not here to talk about me. I just wanted to give a little bit about my credentials and why I chose USC as the best film school, Harvard is the best school of all time, and CalArts as the demigod of all challenger schools that's going to keep you in check and make sure you finished your homework for your other schools too. I valorize CalArts in the sense that they challenge you to the ultimate level, and they don't take "I didn't pass that class" as an excuse. So you're all going to pass my class if you prove to the Coursera computer that you saw these lectures. And if you take the final, that's great. We've got Dead Tell Your Writers music on, so we can't be dinged for that. But let's go right into the movies, because we have a lot to talk about and there's less time to do it in. And we just had this amazing lecture go down about Harry Potter and all the things that make it great, and somehow the soundtrack errored, and we're fine. We love YouTube. We preach YouTube. YouTube Masterclass has given us 3 YouTube creators, We love YouTube, and we think it's great that they issue a masterclass like this and allow me to teach it. And it's worth 4 units, after 16 classes you get 4 units if you pass the final, which is a Coursera judged event, but I will put it out. And I'm only mentioning this because next week would have been the midterm, but I think I've discussed so much by now, and you still might be getting done with semester 1 and then seeing there's a new video up, and it's finally there, and it had only been a few days away. That's where we're at now. So let's get right into the movies. We've got There Will Be Blood. And I think this is a recent movie I need to talk about, because it's important to think that Paul Thomas Anderson, ever since Boogie Nights and Hard 8, he's been making movies that were contractually independent, and that he could use his own cast, and that he could use his own crew, and that they were all Hollywoodized, or already Hollywoodized in most of their cases, as nostalgic actors. That Samuel L. Jackson was in Hard Eight by Paul Thomas Anderson, who was already trying to do the Tarantino style with Hard Eight that you'll notice in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels in a later English movie. But There Will Be Blood is a really interesting movie because when I first laid eyes on it, and because there's no dialogue in the first 10 minutes, I was thinking it was modeling itself after the great silent films like Greed. Now, we all know the story of Greed is the story of a man who doesn't have much money. He's an Irish guy. He's been from descendants of immigrants, and he's an Irish guy. And he lives in LA, and he's like, well, I want to strike it rich. And so he goes to the gold mine, and you see him in the gold mine at the beginning, and it's McTeague, and you get introduced to this big Irish guy. And the whole movie goes through this, like, ups and downs of him sometimes making money at jobs like dentistry and getting a little money and getting a little ahead and then losing it all. And then somehow there's like a bank robbery, lottery, and somebody dies and drops money and they get all this money and greed. Like at one point there is this pile of cash on the table. And it's funny because the end of the movie is the two guys that were friends originally and in love with the same woman, and it was this triangle. They're out in the desert, and one of them is like handcuffed to a horse dying, and the other one's still trying to stand up and get his money. And I think Greed's an important tale to bring up because we always talk about how there's a 2-hour version, and that 2-hour version was edited by some production assistant from 8 hours to 2 hours because the script notes he got from the producers were saying it was too long to ship out, to reproduce, to air in the theaters for the money it would cost to see the film. I mean, I don't even think that was the excuse, but I'm giving the studios the benefit of the doubt that they could only take a 2-hour film at that time, and that there are other films longer, and that the Italian film Cabaret is over 3 hours and all that. And La Rue by the French film is 4 hours, and Greed is 4 hours now because Turner Classic Movies put a bunch of pictures, photographs, stills that were taken from the movie into that movie and made a 4-hour version. And this is Greed, and so it reminds me of There Will Be Blood, not just because we're getting this sense of like these big surroundings and larger than life characters and really realistic to its times and what we picture in our mind. And that really, what Daniel Day-Lewis is doing isn't really immoral. I mean, you can't really put morality on oil just because he wants to control it all. I mean, you could say that's a monopoly and that's frowned against, but how else are you going to start the oil industry unless you control the entire pipeline around the world, and that way you can monitor the whole thing. And if parts of it go wrong, they won't be blamed on some company that wouldn't give up their rights that would be worthless anyway once you had the pipe built. So if you listen to his ideas, you're actually like, well, that's actually a good idea. Maybe we should let him take over the pipeline and we'll just kind of do our little wells and maybe get paid by him to keep up the actual pipeline, and that's a decent way out of it. And I don't see how he's cheating this town out of it, but, there's a feeling in the film that he is ambitious, but beyond ambitious. Like he wants power and he wants control and he wants it his way. This can be further revealed in the character of his son, who is found as a baby near a well in the silent part of the beginning. And some people die by falling down wells, and he breaks his arm and he's still carrying the baby around. And it's like that 3 bad men, 3 godfathers thing where these guys are carrying this baby and he carries it back to camp, and it just feels like that gritty, hard-edged realism of Greed. And it's like, it feels like then it's turning into this like D.W. Griffith type movie, or not really Cecil B. DeMille, because this one has a little bit of social commentary. And when his son grows up, he gets into an accident near a well, and the well explodes and the son goes deaf. And so for the rest of the movie, almost till the end, there's no real interaction with his son because he sends him away on a train. That the pastor of the small town he needs to clear for a pipeline calls him out for abandoning his son, there's no doubt in my mind. But that he gets last revenge, Daniel Day-Lewis's character gets last revenge by smashing the twin brother guy that leads the pastor that leads the church of the small town he's trying to get the pipeline from. The brother who's never seen is the one that runs off with the actual money, and that was cool with Daniel Day-Lewis's character, who then executes the other brother with a pin after getting him to shout, "What is it, everyone?" See, I'm having amnesia because I'm trying to remember this last line. It's like, God is dead and I'm a false prophet. And he makes them shout it 3 times, and then he yells, "I'm finished," and the movie's over. But what I think is interesting about this audio display is that a lot of these scenes, the camera's drifting away in these almost like Alain Resnais format, like widescreens all over this mansion. And we just got the last scene of the deaf guy, his son, marrying some girl and taking his trade elsewhere. And by now, we're looking at this old spinster thinking he's feeling greedy. And really, he could have looked at it like he was helping humanity by building the pipeline and saving everybody a lot of trouble. But that he wanted total dominion and was ever blasted with the excuse to kneel in church and say he abandoned his son really makes us all kind of cheer for him in the ultimate evil way when he gets that twin brother back for that. So I really can't say that not only does the commentary about church and politics not mix in this film or ever, that revenge is played out even against this one guy in the movie who plays the supposed twin brother of Daniel Day-Lewis's characters in the film. And almost within 20 minutes of them knowing stories about each other, Daniel Day-Lewis recognizes that this guy's been stiffing him, so he shoots him and there's no more said of it. So you really don't want to get on Daniel Day-Lewis' bad side. And, I don't want to get on his bad side by telling him, hey, you're doing a good thing, you're building a pipeline. That's going to save a lot of people millions of dollars, and so you'll make $1 million. I'd be a bad accountant for that, because I'd be like, wait, you don't have to blow everybody up. Just find a legal way to get them off of there because it's cheaper for the government to produce that way. See, I thought of solutions, like just build a gas station and have it up to eco standards, man. And that he did have a lot of his pipes up to eco standards. Even the ones he fell in at the beginning were technically crafted wells. And it's kind of thing that happens on the job, is falling in wells. But that he's the owner of all the wells from Texas to California, up across to hopefully one day Alaska. But that's in the such far future that only there will be blood preludes in this tale of the search for power. Now, I think there's a lot of things interesting about this movie that we've got to discuss. One of them is Paul Thomas Anderson's cinematography. That he dwells on long takes and he compares them to like Max O'Fool. I could see how Lola Montes by Max O'Fool demonstrates a Paul Thomas Anderson quest in its long takes and its flowery arrangements of decor and its production design, spot on to the time, and that the cuts are, and that Paul Thomas Anderson loves Tarantino and Scorsese, and postmodern is a definite feel of this very same D.W. Griffith notion of the cinema for the sake of cinema. And that this comes out at such a time that all these movies at once, like No Country for Old Men, another masterpiece, Sweeney Todd, a Tim Burton masterpiece, they're all coming out around There Will Be Blood, and all of them were great, and I thought they were all about as good as each other. And it's only by default that we see Paul Thomas Anderson, who hadn't really made a bad film ever, from Hard Eight all the way through to Boogie Nights and Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and everything. And then There Will Be Blood. I mean, he's a great director, and I don't think we should shun what are called structuring metaphors in his movies. And we see that the MacGuffin structuring metaphor, if I may say, or the bluffed metaphor, is the falling of the frogs in Magnolia, which he didn't know was in the Bible, that frogs fell as a plague. And I only bring that up because Paul Thomas Anderson, like so many of his kind, are disinterested in that kind of work, that to them, like, that seems non-imposable on the real world and any kind of influence. But then he takes it as an idea of his own that he's already had already, and he doesn't mind that it's been in the Bible. I think that's cool, but the point is the frogs falling from the sky could actually happen if the wind hit a bunch of frogs in an ocean. So they're falling from the sky. The Exodus 8:2 is displayed on all the signs. We're getting like this feeling that we're in a Sinead O'Connor music video, and Julianne Moore is at the center of it. That Tom Cruise is a motivational speaker, and heck, he'd have probably gotten through tonight's masterclass better than me. He'd said, well, it's the second time you taught it tonight, and it better go good, and he would jam it out way better than me, is totally, and more eloquently. But I'm trying to get the fascination with film criticism in the year 2007 into perspective, because that year there were so many great movies that it was hard to keep track of everything. And my favorite wasn't just There Will Be Blood, but I like No Country for Old Men too. And the Coen brothers are kind of a March of Dimes speech of their own. And by that it means we could have like a whole denoted speech to the Coen brothers. We could talk about Blood Simple to No Country for Old Men to Burn After Reading. You know, we could go all the way through to the new stuff, The American or something, I think it is. See, I'm not quite bona fide qualified to cover their brand new stuff. There are some recent films by the Coen brothers that have just taken world history for being the only ones out when movies weren't out, and they didn't even know they were out. And the whole thing was the loss of Hollywood for a while, so it disappeared, and then suddenly the Coen brothers still had their mastery displayed, and it's the perseverance of the Coen brothers is noteworthy in that extent. And I just think that with them writing Bridge of Spies for Steven Spielberg, for instance, as a more contemporary film from the last 6 or 7 years, that the Coen brothers would collaborate with Steven Spielberg, to me, is what I like about postmodern Hollywood, that all these directors are collaborating together. I like when Steven Spielberg directs with Tobe Hooper with Poltergeist, and they may have taken over and not really been collaborating, but they still work. You know, Rodriguez and Tarantino have collaborated not just on Dusk Till Dawn, when Tarantino wrote the script and Rodriguez directed, but Grindhouse. Grindhouse is my favorite Tarantino movie, favorite Rodriguez movie, and that the Rodriguez one stands the test of time, and the Tarantino one stands the test of time. And I know Robert Rodriguez a little bit, and I don't know Quentin Tarantino at all, but I'll tell you, both those movies are so beautiful for what they do to B films, and how they bring it up to an A level, and how they collaborate, but they use their own turf to make their own movies, and you often wonder how often they connected, but that they knew they were making a 3-hour movie with 2 parts that would be separated into new versions with longer constituent parts in the movies. And I think the bumps and jumps that are scratched all over the film stock is digitally produced scratches on purpose, and everybody's been using those since MTV was using those. And Grindhouse, while not quite down the same road as Kill Bill or even the earlier blaxploitation type movies by Tarantino, and even his westerns, and the Grindhouse is the ultimate to me because it stands out as where they're saying, this is a B film, this is an exploitation film, this is how they're made, and this is how we're going to turn it into a blockbuster extravaganza you're never going to forget, because you'll be so mesmerized and so overpowered by the stunt work and so overjoyed at the car chase and the zombie apocalypse and the girl with the gun on her leg is all we got left. And I think that one of the things we've got to remember is that some of us would call Grindhouse low cult, or a mixture with a little bit of high cult, but I think it's art, and really of the highest order, because just because it's not as didactic or it doesn't teach morals or guidebooks on ethics, really. Maybe a few of those horror film tricks of like how to avoid a killer by seeing how he uses ways to kill you, but that never came in handy because then the killer just psychs you out and does the opposite. And I'm just saying, well, Grindhouse, you wouldn't think that I'd teach that at such a highbrow university, but that it's a it's a powerful movement to film how you can make an action adventure movie horrific, twist Kurt Russell into an evil cast, you know, have all these amazing people all throughout the film that are doing other projects, and they're bringing to life these like movies that should be remembered as much as Star Wars, but are absolutely just as good because even though they can be offensive and R-rated and adult needing, the actual action and adventure is taken up to such a high extreme that it's even looking at itself as its own pastiche while it takes Godardian memories and uses Godardian style, and it takes a lot of Scorsese style, and so all these intertexts are working out. And so before There Will Be Blood, there was Grindhouse, and the Grindhouse is like all for Truffaut auteur and not really for the tradition of quality, and is going to montage in this very bombastic way. And that Robert Rodriguez's film has as many experiments. Every shot's a trick shot in both of those films. Planet Terror and Grindhouse, Death Proof. Every shot's a trick shot. They were doing things like that with Twilight Zone, the movie, but check this out. Tarantino and Rodriguez, whether they discussed they were going to or not, made every scene a trick shot. That means cameras are either taking a trick or computers are etched into the trick. And in Sin City, you know for a fact every shot's a trick shot. And Tarantino did collaborate a little with that and direct some of that. But we've got to move on to the next film. And this is one that's going to put us a little more at ease than There Will Be Blood and some of the examples of movies that are kind of in the same but different genre, things that are based on each other but only lightly because they all detect their own style. And the next one we see, and I hope we don't get booed for this week's episode, because we already showed There Will Be Blood, but then we bring up Grindhouse, and now there's this divided crowd that thinks that we just like B movies because they're just silly and overexpressive and just kind of camp, but there's a cult following of these movies. That'd be like saying Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the horror film is somehow gets old and doesn't look real anymore. I think it stands up today as just as real and just as powerful and just as scary, especially if you see it in the theater again. So, but that would be one of those beleaguering discussions that is low cult automatically a horror film. Well, we all know I Walked with a Zombie was kind of a high-class Val Lewton film. So no, it doesn't have to be low cult just because it's horror. That we like our horror low cult, and these guys like to bring that up to a Tim Burton-like extravaganza of B movies, is so good for me because it keeps me in remembrance of the types of movies like Rolling Thunder that I need to remember in my mind as movies that have helped with the car chase in the movie Grindhouse. Now, there's one last thing I gotta say about Death Proof, and that is in the final segment. Well, in the first segment, we find out that this Death Proof car that's run by this stunt man is used to kill women and not by getting into crashes, and Kurt Russell plays the killer. So he's going after these chicks. He knocks them off the road, almost kills them. They live, and then the whole car race turns around. Now that it's gone one way and gets to the end, and then it comes all the way back, it's to the grace of now they're chasing him. They chase him down, and that's the end of the movie. They kick the crap out of him, or whatever. That Kurt Russell meets his just desserts as this stuntman is now what we're going to discuss as just desserts. You having to partake in the John Ford story of Quiet Man. And the Dead Telluritis over there seem to agree that Quiet Man's a study that we need to have. That the soundtrack to this, I can't hum or can't sing because I can't hum and I can't sing. I mean, I can sing, but it doesn't have lyrics. I'd like you all to check out the Quiet Man soundtrack, and I'm sure you'd recognize some of the music of the film. It's a film where John Wayne's character moves to Ireland, meets Maureen O'Hara's character, falls in love with her, finds out he has to live there in that town at least for 6 months to go courting with this girl before he can officially date her after 6 more months. And he doesn't want to wait. He wants to marry her. He is getting his home back in this small town. And that when he gets there, everybody's kind of cordial and nice and funny. And that there are stereotypes, not really, that John Ford may have been guilty of stereotypes in some of his Judge Priest movies is kind of was true about Step and Fetch It, but The Quiet Man, as far as Irish go, is, harmless. I mean, I could see how even Griffith's Broken Blossoms with the Irish boxer could have made someone think, why do they always have to be alcoholic? And in Quiet Man, he's not an alcoholic. The reason he's quiet is because he has a guilty past, because he was a boxer, and when he boxed some dude out real hard, he killed him on accident. And so he got the prize money and left America, never to hit anyone again, never to box again. He killed someone. But this is all a secret revealed halfway through the movie. And for the most part, you're sitting there going, well, now that John Wayne is in this movie and he's in this town and he loves this girl, sooner or later the secret's going to get out. But that's not what happens. It's not even that the secret gets out because he tells a boxer about it. It's because Maureen O'Hara wants to marry him right away, but he won't stand up to her brother because he doesn't want to fight. That's what leads to the high-pressed Donnybrook at the end. And now that we've seen everything from like horse races and all these outdoor events, carnival-like events, we get to the end of the movie after 2.5 hours with this beautiful look at Ireland and these traditional values all standing up. And now it's Victor McLaglen, who's the angry Irish brother that thinks they should have waited the average 12 months to court and date. So John Wayne swings a punch finally after beckoned enough by Victor McLaglen's character. And that they have a fist fight to the music of the film is what's so cool about the choreography of the music and the movie. Because the violent scene, while not as violent as the end of The Wild Bunch, which we'll always compare as the most violent ending of film history. And we can even get to The Wild Bunch one day on MASTERCLASS and say, well, they're coming into town and they're animated over the top by the credits, and Sam Peckinpah's coming off the TV screen onto the big screen with Ride the High Country already under his belt. And so that The Wild Bunch comes out in this volatile time in 1969 is already, along with Easy Rider, and it had already been out since 2 years. The Graduate had been out, Midnight Cowboy's coming out. And in The Wild Bunch, they get to this town and they're all hiding out. The Wild Bunch are, and they seem to be these bandits, these American criminals that have snuck off the chain and the ball and chain and escaped jail and escaped prison and formed bandito group kind of. But there's only one Mexican in the group, and it's rare that there is one. Even in this 60s equality time, was there not rarely an actual Mexican in a movie that was a hero, and that he's one of the Wild Bunch means they're kind of anti-heroes, but they're actually real heroes because they always fight for a good cause. But that their first gun out with the government at the beginning of the movie kills these women that are prohibitionists is a good call that the Wild Bunch shouldn't always get engaged in battle, that it could be a bloody one, that they lost a few members, that they lose all the members and gain a few members back. Spoiler alert is actually the ending, because I always thought they all got killed, but that the new Wild Bunch formed with characters they'd met along the way of the movie is totally amazing about that movie, that they all go down getting their Spanish friend out of the castle, and they kill everybody and die themselves in a Macbeth kind of cluster F. They all go down with the ship. The Wild Bunch has some crazy parts where they go to Mexico and they're all partying it up. Wild Bunch has these crazy parts where they rob a train and all they get is a bag full of washers and they're shot at, stolen from, and ridiculed. And in Mexico, they're treated like kings because they've done so much for his friend who's from Mexico. And what I like about the Wild Bunch is it goes it goes through a bunch of blood ballets, which are the structuring metaphors. Now that we've talked about structuring metaphors as being a thematic of a modernist film, the structuring motif of the music in this is almost the metaphor of the Ireland in this. But this song is kind of a metaphor, but a structuring metaphor is usually a visual device, like for instance the screen in Persona that was kind of a mind screen, but when the little kid goes up and touches the big face that's being projected on the screen, you get the sense that two films are colliding into a mirror land and they're not matching up where they are in the film, is one way you could look at that, because the whole reason you'd show the movie showing a movie with someone sizing himself up to the projector screen is to draw attention to the fact that you're making a movie, and all of those little miniature art film, student film things that Bergman's doing in Persona are the structuring metaphor of that in an obvious dreamlike way, but nothing's obvious in a dreamlike way. So, now that we've covered those 60s movies, I highly recommend Persona for those that want to see two women that act together, that have really dramatic moments, really romantic moments talking about their past, but the one doesn't talk because she sees a movie that traumatizes her about Vietnam, but it's not even a movie, it's like a TV show where they show a clip from Vietnam and it traumatizes her so much she quits acting. She's kind of a popular TV actress. She never wants to talk again, and now a psychologist woman is over her care. That this gets very romantic in a friendly way is interesting, and that there are beautiful shots of Lee Volman and B.B. Anderson, which are several times in Bergman films, and that they're going through this whole motion of her maybe talking again, but she never does. Spoiler alert. The psychologist pretty much goes mute herself does actually mean that the actress may get her voice back, because we think they've actually transponded souls or like images, because that's the other reason the kid was touching the screen, is to put his soul up there in the higher image, which is going to be a cut to him anyway, maybe if you were to reel the footage back together. But if you were to reel the footage back together, I think the art film footage of the skeleton that's running around the room could actually be a throwback to Jean Vigo's Diablos Go to School or Zero for Conduct. The Zero for Conduct starts out on a train, and there's these kids and they have these balloons, and this is 1933 sound film France, and it's like still a classic ratio and kind of poetic realism, but more avant-garde. And that, like, this French film takes all these kids through this like Chaplin routine at the beginning where they're making balloon animals and making jokes, and then they get up and they're reading comics upside down, and they're putting mustaches on, smoking cigarettes, and they get out and they go to school. Of course, when you're in the 5th grade, you always smoke cigarettes before school, I guess, in France. So they go on in, and they get into the school, and there's all this room for like the classroom to be kind of claustrophobic, and all the students from that class are already in class. And there's a skeleton that's chasing the teacher around at some point in these montages of these brutal examiners that are kind of just bagging on the kids in this we don't need no education kind of way. And that it's like a precursor to If, but the kids don't really attack the teachers too much. They do have to throw rocks at them at the end, but that's just of their double statues, not their doppelgangers. They had statues of the teachers made so they could sit out there so the kids could throw things at them. And I think that's about as rebellious as that gets. That doesn't really signify the kind of massacre that's in If that you want to avoid, but If has other practicalities that we don't need no education is burling up, and this whole kind of school is cool, but it's ruling us down, and that's not the way school isn't meant to be. I mean, I don't really recognize it as easy in a bowl of roses, but that these kids are having fun. There's even a scene where they're all floating around this room when they're going to bed at night in the boarding school that they're staying at. And that all the teachers are kind of mean to the kids, but not all of them. There's one kind of Chaplin-esque, again, here we go, actually Chaplin-esque kind of guy that follows them around. And the film is a sound film. It's a miracle of sounds. Between the singing of the choir and the beautiful bell ringing and all these things that Vigo's manufactured all the way so he can get ready for Lonta, which he would die on the production of. And we can talk about Lonta some other time, but Zero for Conduct reminded me of those rites of passage films, like 400 Blows by Truffaut in the French New Wave in 1959, which dealt with two kids that went truant from school, and there's a scene where they ride this ride. It's a circular device that spins, and the camera follows them, and they look like they're on a zoetrope, which is old roller that used to roll around and show pictures as though they were moving by dicing up every other picture. But we kind of got off track from John Ford. One thing I like about John Ford is he won Oscars 5 times, and 3 of them were military awards, like for the Battle of Midway, which we had done a masterclass on recently, and how John Ford had taken an Oscar for Quiet Man as director, and it was his 4th director Oscar since The Informer and Grapes of Wrath and How Green Was My Valley, and those were his 4 Oscars, and then he got 2 or 3 Army Awards, so he got a lot. Walt Disney got more Oscars just for the nature documentaries and the short cartoons than anyone else, but that John Ford got 4 for directing, and he has to count his war movies, is John Ford's bag, dude. I mean, like, if John Ford wants to probably write into the Academy and say, you owe me the Lifetime Achievement Award, and I want the Pulitzer Prize back that I was forcing John Steinbeck to take. I mean, it's just like there's this whole history of John Ford using his gun to keep John Wayne on the set, and that The Quiet Man was a pretty peaceful shoot, even during the fighting scenes, that it was all boiling up to be in that kind of elastic pullback until it breaks, and then when the levee breaks, this time you don't have Taxi Driver to avenge everyone. You have a good old Donnybrook, where John Wayne shows his skill as a boxer. He doesn't punch Victor McLaglen so hard he kills him, but that he has a mighty swing could be looked at by some critics to be the woman captive in this, that she's made to dress a role only available to women attracting men, and that she advances to his come-ons, though he is an attractive guy, which is in a really conservative society, may make it seem that this film is using Maureen O'Hara to be kind of this star-studded sex symbol, but I don't really get the feeling with her down-hominess that she's playing too much into her stardom, which she did have as a box office draw. John Wayne, of course, having it, and their romance isn't too hard to believe. So, though it's quick and uncertain that the woman isn't more treated as object, and that she's helpless unless he kicks his brother's asses like a Delilah story, it's like, if you love me, you'll tell me your weakest, your weakness, your secret weakness. And then it's like, by the time you tell them that you realize you love them enough to tell them your secret weakness, then they use their secret weakness on you. But this one, she actually loves him for it even more, that he finally kicks her brother's ass. Not that he doesn't kick his ass. And it's an amazing boxing scene between Victor McLaglen and John Wayne. And it reminds me of She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, with Victor McLaglen going to the cantina, the saloon, and starting to get fired up on liquor, and almost like John Wayne's temporarily an Alcoholic Anonymous guy. He punches Victor McLaglen so hard he goes flying out the bar, through the doors, down the stairs, and it's almost used for comic effect, but it's also disdain on the alcoholic. Whereas Quiet Man, if everybody doesn't sit down and have a pint, we got problems, and even everyone deserves a pint, and then you gotta buy everyone a pint, and everybody keeps drinking pints of beer. And this isn't done in a stereotypical way, although Victor McLaglen's character doesn't really have negative Irish stereotypes, and that John Ford was part Irish, doesn't just make me say that they're less than Griffith, especially metaphors of stereotypes in these films. that I still hold Judge Priest guilty is only because those movies have the Stephen Fetchit character, and that's a pretty rotten character portrayal of African American. But by the time you get to Sergeant Rutledge or Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the African American is shown in a decent light. So that John Ford's come a long way since the Iron Horse, and he pulled out of the Dark Ages, pulled into the light, saw it how realistic it could be, and around the time of Quiet Man, delivered entertainment, maybe not so much on politics or just romance in the kind of way a woman likes romance, but she still feels as though she's the one putting herself out there to be sold. She's even paying in this with her dowry, and all she wants is for her brother to not push her husband around. So it takes him a while to fight because he killed that dude in the ring, and it's an amazing movie. And if you want to have a good time with your lady friend or significant other, get down and watch Quiet Man together. Yeah, there's some heavy boxing and some weird Irish customs, but nothing like as bizarre as some of the movies about solstice I've seen from Sweden lately. So back in the 50s, you got to remember this is pretty Americanized, but they did take it to Ireland to film it, where they also filmed The Sun Shines Bright, which was actually like a line from a poem that a poet wrote that John Ford made into a really interesting, almost artistic like experiment, at least on his level. Of Mogambo I will not speak. Let's move on. Satyajit Ray's The Music Room. Now, I've been coming to this before, and by the way, this is a Criterion Blu-ray. And we haven't talked about this film except maybe a little in semester one, but it's an important film to bring up, only because it was 1959, and that means it's a little bit before Hard Day's Night. Now, that Hard Day's Night hits the scene as the first rock and roll movie to ever rock out and have a rock band in it and totally go wild with their style and have hard rock and no soft rock and go clingety clang. It's Hard Day's Night. And then everybody loves the Beatles, and everybody's competing to be the biggest Beatlemaniac is on everybody's mind right now about Hard Day's Night. In 1962, nobody'd seen anything like it. And that Richard Lester directed it. He wasn't exactly a well-known director before or after that, except for that he was known as the guy that directed Hard Day's Night and Help. Help is just a few more Monty Pythons ahead of the game there, but I think that Hard Day's Night is a rock musical in the way that, The Who's and The Wall, The Who's Tommy is a rock musical, and The Wall by Pink Floyd is a rock musical. Those are the greatest rock musicals, and Hard Day's Night tops them all because they're being chased by women that want to jump on them everywhere. They've got their old man uncle following them around that he can't be enough out of the way, and totally obsessed with strange existential theories, and that Ringo gets so drunk he gets hungover, that you can see in the film he's hungover, and that they're smoking weed in every scene is totally true. And that they keep popping out of the floor in weird places to practice and weird places to perform, that they're getting filmed on TV everywhere they go, that they see themselves in these cameras that take the picture that's on the cover of the album, and it's all these pictures taken in ways. And so Hard Day's Night starts it all with the rock movie, and that every rock movie is a testament to Hard Day's Night. They're such hard rockers. They got money, they got sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They got their weed, their women, their money. They're going big, and they can't even barely get to a place without being mobbed by these female fans. And that's kind of true about how it was for the Beatles, although they're kind of filming it as it goes. Now that there's stop, fast, forward, rewinds, and stop, fast, forward, forwards, that means it goes one way, another, and just by meaning of flipping the film stock back. And then in super fast time, backwards, or super fast time forward, so that it looks like it's stretched out, but that it pauses and stretches out before lurching forward or backing up is what's so interesting about the slow-mo and super speed on Hard Day's Night, where they're dancing around. That they're filming it from some kind of a airlift helicopter is noticeable too, and I do think that scene at the end of 1969's Easy Rider is filmed from a helicopter, where after the bike that Dennis Hopper's riding on it and Peter Fonda crashes too, and that you see their bikes roasting, and this kind of helicopter takes off to Bob Dylan music. And in Hard Day's Night, there's kind of this helicopter lift in the middle where they're running out and they're playing rugby, and they're getting together with the football, and they're out on the field, and they are running backwards and fast and running backwards and forwards, and thus the advent of the music video. But let me vouch for the advent of the music video slightly before that with Kenneth Anger's Fireworks, because Kenneth Anger is actually one of the ones that was matching up film to sound for a lot of his experimental films. And that he may have had a few things that were music experiments, not only that, but with Fantasia and Oscar Fischinger, there were already cartoon animations that were following the cartoon to the music, which you can do that either way in a cartoon. You can have the music be tapped in or be following it. But usually you have to do both when you're drawing so you know which way the direction you're going to match the music. And it gets very complicated for these artists that want to match visuals to music. Now, in Masterclass Semester 1, I had mentioned how Busby Berkeley had done that first match to music sign, and that they were actually doing that as early as the Jazz Singer, which was the first sound film, which was the most successful sound film up to 1927, and only one really out. But they wired all the theaters in the world with sound after the Jazz Singer came out, and there was no longer even small silent films in between. This all leads up to another pressing event in the invention of Bollywood, and that's the music room. And that Satyajit Ray is an art India director, is one thing we talked about with The World of Apu and Pather Panchali and Aparajito. And we all know Pather Panchali, the story of the little road, is about Apu when he was a young boy, how he saw trains, how he hung with his sister, how his grandma was dying, how his dad was a writer and only never home, and how his mom had to take care of everybody. It's a beautiful movie. It's poetic realism. It's pure cinema. I mean, if you love movies, you'll love Satyajit Ray's Apu trilogy. And then Aparajito is the unvanquished, and he has to marry this girl that's in a relationship with his friend who goes insane, so he's the surrogate best man at the wedding, so he has to take this lady to be his bride, and then he starts to like her. And in the first one, the story of the little road, the little girl passes away, and Apu goes on, and he grows up, and now it's up to his wife and mother to die, and him all seem absurd, and that he tosses away his notes and kind of this die my notes ritual, and he loses his whole English book that he's working on, which is actually an Indian, and it's an Indian film. I just meant that it was like a Western type story that he was developing or something, but it seemed to be very India of nature, like Bhagavad Gita, and then the nature of Westerners on India. It was something like that, and then he has this big dissertation set up for it, and then it all just goes downhill because he keeps having to deal with death. And then in The World of Apu, which is the one I'm describing now, the third one, the trilogy of Apu, he grows his beard out like Little Big Man style, goes out in the wild and becomes like this kind of wildebeest, as though he'd never seen civilization before, and he was just always in the wild. And I've seen this in Operative Command and many movies of being out in the wild long enough to feel as though you've always been out in the wild. It's a long time, but he comes back to, I think he quits alcohol like his dad did back in the day when he supported the family more by selling his stories to newspapers, usually having to pay them to take it as a broke writer. And Apu gets privileges to go to school, but he himself is a broke writer, and that the book never gets released, and I apologize for saying the Westerner. This is the term I was using on how he was describing the book, and it's nothing like that, but you never really get too much other than the poetry into what that book actually was, and that it didn't survive at his hands. Think about it, though. It could be the story you're watching, and that could be what they're saying as we've come to the end, done with the manuscript, you've read the whole thing, that's my life story. If you think about it, The World of Apu, what makes that one different is you remember that he's been writing that book since he was young, especially since he was at school in Aparajito at the beginning, learning school, and not just English, but mostly India language and Bengal. But Satyajit Ray doesn't really represent Bollywood really that much, although you can say he does because of the music room that I'm going to conclude with in this masterclass discussion. But that Satyajit Ray's The Music Room matches the image to the music like Bollywood is actually a fiction story about a sheik, and it's based on a true story. A sheik who is about to die the next day takes all of his money and throws one big concert. But he doesn't die right away at the end of the concert. It's the spoiler of the movie because he lives through it. Now he's broke, and now he doesn't have enough food to eat, and the band is gone because the band takes their pay. And in India, you pay a band out the nose to play. And they're not playing at his funeral, they're playing at a concert he's having them throw, and that Ravi Shankar's name is all over this film. And that's no coincidence that Ravi Shankar would become like a Beatle, would be in Woodstock, would be training George Harrison on sitar, would be at all these events in the 60s and get his first as like a Bollywood up-and-comer in a Satyajit Ray art film that has more to do with music and Indian music than almost any other great musical. I mean, this is like the Student Prince musical, like the Student Prince of Old Heidelberg we know as Murnau. And the Student Prince with Mario Alonso's voice in it, like almost like in a jazz singer kind of way, but like in a totally acceptable way because we know that the voice of Mario Alonso is going over this character, as does some of Audrey Hepburn's roles where she's not the one actually singing, but that their lip syncing isn't really ridiculed because it's all part of the sound design and the process. And a lot of actors say their lines on duped doubling effects when they loop the sound back around and re-record the sound, which they did on Wild Bunch. And the music room uses both kind of layers of sound, live recorded in one shot and then mixed around with different tracks. That I like it because it's like a precursor to Bollywood and these coming musicals that are rock musicals, especially Hard Day's Night, which is not going to really totally bring up the Ravi Shankar thing, but that's going to happen a few years later, that the music room is becoming a big film and is renaissance for Satyajit Ray and really puts the world of Apu into perspective, that maybe that book was the book of the movie, was the script of the movie or something self-reflexively, because there's always in modernism some kind of self-reflexive, why are we filming these tree skippers on this lakey shore in the middle of this movie about this kid's life in India, and that it's the first one brings you this real rural setting in India to poor town, and the second one is a little more in the city, and that the third one, industry, is seen as the ruination of Mother Nature or something along those lines, because it's real cynical and pessimistic by the time his mom, wife, and daughter are dead. Now, that I told you at the point of the music room is that the guy who throws the concert is the one responsible for paying the band, and that he pays out the nose and basically spends all of his money. And it's like, instead of Citizen Kane, it's like we focus on the last day of a guy's life and all he wants is to hear a big band. So now his funeral cost is going to bankrupt anyone he's willed to, and he's willing to take that as a responsibility and is kind of jeered for that even by the bands. But they do it anyway because he has the money to pay for it. And in India, gold coins are worth music, and that music is real expensive because it takes a lot of practice, and that it takes a lot of artistry is really what makes us all get to see this film an amazing feat of Criterion and Satyajit Ray, because they've brought to us some of the most explicit Ravi Shankar movements of music and shown us that other bands of the India scene were about to fire up over to an old studio on Bollywood, and they were about to fire up this whole thing even apart from Ray, where pop singers and more Ravi Shankar would be there, and they'd all come together for these like band sequences where India's Bollywood has made music videos kind of in the MTV way for just as long as America with its Hard Day's Night features. And the music room is really the seminal movie that connected all those India movies, although there is kind of a moral about spending. Is it a good idea? Is it Midas touch to spend all your money on one big rock show, or in this case, it's one big music room? And of course, the last waltz is going to be like the last show on earth too, like the concert before we retire and never come back again, with Robbie Robertson and the band and Bob Dylan and Neil Diamond and everybody. But the music room reminds me of that, because but that they're not dying at the last waltz, but that they're leaving the band, and it still has this finality that's not quite, it's not fatalism though, as in the music room. He's got to spend it only on one thing, and that's hearing his favorite bands in one great big concert that he always wanted to throw anyway. And what's weird though is you kind of find out that he was going to spend that money anyway on those bands anyway, and that was what he saved the money for, and nobody had an objection to it until it was on the day he died. And then they're kind of like, well, were you supposed to spend your money on that? Because I could have used that money. They were just kind of coming down on him. And even though they all hung out at the concert and partied. And when you're partying at the concert in the music room, you're totally forgetting everything else. And it's most of the movie is in the music room with these bands and these spectacular Indian music numbers. They're just brilliant Indian music. The best you'll hear on film. And it's like everything's matching. Everything's edited to the sound. Everyone's singing in perfect chorus. The only real drama is the guy's having a good time, and he should be worried about his last prayers before death. Is about as dark as it gets, but in the film, but that's not very dark considering he's not being questioned by the government as to why he spent their money or a funeral money or anybody else's supposed to a lot of gold coins, and how he skipped the FBI and somehow put on their show. But that they kind of let this guy who was kind of rich in life too, and in India he was kind of rich, but he had gambled some of his debts, already puts him into moral question bank number 2. That he doesn't die quite a while till after the concert is over, and we don't ever see when he does, is questionable number 3. That there's no real closure in that stance, and that the bands don't really take a moral selective side, not that they were required to, about playing his last show. And that everybody seems to have a good time and kind of questions where he got the money to pay them. Glad he did, but now they gotta go. And they just kind of found out it would be his last concert, and he felt like he put on the concert, which he did hire the bands, but it was a concert just so he could see it, and a bunch of his friends got to see it. And the only real critical message is are we allowed to have that one last request? Because if we're allowed to have a one last request, then we're going to be just fine, and we're going to be like, well, I'm getting hung, but I can at least have a cigarette before I go. And isn't a cigarette the most enjoyable thing? And then I won't even have to worry about quitting the habit after that, man. And it's like that last request isn't even as severe as that he's getting hung. It's that he's going to die of a disease the next day, and he's not contagious. And his friends finally come over because they want to see the music, and it takes him forever to convince them that he's got these bands at his house that are all jamming out. So, if he could have his last request in Satyajit Ray, of course, this is 1958, and it's even before Sharaluda, and it's with the freeze frame, the 400 blows into the movie freeze frame, And Osaka Elegy has one of those freeze frames, where at the end of the movie, everything's wrapping up, and the character looks up and it freeze frames. It does that in 400 Blows. The kid's walking along the beach shore. He's walking along the beach shore. He just got out of jail or whatever. He's running away, and now freeze frame. And then it kind of zooms in on him. And in Sharaluda by Satyajit Ray, there's a scene where the guy's reaching out to grab his wife and kiss her, and there's a sudden freeze frame. And you almost think the camera's moving around, and it isn't. It's a frozen picture. And those freeze frames, the Osaka Elegy, 400 Blows, and Sharaluda, are probably the 3 ending the film with no closure by using the freeze frame, which is representing that we're not going to show you the closure because we're stuck in this one last moment, and that's the last we can show you. It's not that the reel ran out, it's that we had to stick it here so you'd see this picture for a few more seconds, and now we're done. And that they saved the freeze frame for the end isn't always use of the freeze frame, is it? Because in Darling, by John Schlesinger, you see the actress in that movie, Julie, and Julie Christie, and that she's posing for this modeling session. Julie Christie is like standing up in front of this camera and taking pictures, and I don't think she's like fully bearing anything, but that Darling would be a movie that we'd forgive it of, because she's not only the object of desire, she's the subject of her own world-known individuality. So it's kind of this feminist thing going on. But that you see Julie Christie get in all these different positions to take the picture. And when the picture freeze frames for a minute, it's to denote that there's a freeze frame of the picture, like they do in Raging Bull when there's boxing scenes going on and a camera flashes. They'll take a freeze frame of either the flash bulb of the camera just to make an effect, or the actual shot of the boxing match will be shown in like quick freeze frames, and then we'll get all this attention drawn to the making of the film, and then that Raging Bull's in this kind of black and white is going back to these films like 400 Blows that are freeze framing, and these Darling type films that are freeze framing. The Satyajit Ray had the good one in the Golden Fortress too, didn't he? Because at the Telluride Film Festival, I saw the Golden Fortress. Roger Ebert was there. And it was the end of the festival, and everybody was getting tired, and we were watching this Satyajit Ray movie, and there were other movies on around, and I don't remember what they were, and we were discussing what we liked about the festival, and it's 3 hours of train, like this guy Peter Sellers reminded me. He said that you'd have to be like Bionic Man to get through the 3-hour train ride at the beginning of the movie, and it goes on and on and on, and this one long take, it's like a 3-hour long take practically. They just changed up the film stock. Now it isn't that bad, but it's like one angle in this small train going one way for 3 hours. Totally cool to watch, because at one point they're out in this house and they kind of taking a break, and it's this small house, and they kind of get adjusted and get comfortable and have more conversations about the day, and they're all catching up with each other and actually talking about events that are going on. And it's actually quite interesting to watch this level of realism and to see this interaction with all these characters. So then at the end of the movie, the kid goes into this kind of golden boy stance, and he's like at this golden fortress, and it's kind of this like playground for like someone that would be like the Dalai Lama or something at an early age. And this kid jumps in the air, and then there's a freeze frame, and it freeze frames him in the air while making it look like he's flying. Now, one thing I got to look at about all these other freeze frames is it doesn't alter the picture except in 400 Blows, because there's a zoom in, like there is on Blow Up, which is a freeze frame of a zoom in. It's the same kind of thing, only Blow Up, they're doing it with a film like projector that will bring them closer to the image, and that's how they do it in all of them, but they reveal the process in Blow Up. So if the frame never really moves once it's photographed and freeze framed, then I would say the Hard Day's Night rule again applies, that if you're freeze framing from one to the next, it still looks like it's graphically altered. And the freeze frames in other movies look like an altering of the final shot, but that they kind of indicate what I've been getting at is a full self-reflexivity of drawing attention to itself as a being of modernism that has that has pure existentialism, that has no metaphysic and no closure. And we see that movies, again, we've reviewed this before, but let's review this fact that a movie without closure is definitely one more to be modern, because in modernism, in classicism, there's a beginning, middle, and end. In modernism, you can come into one point of the story and leave the story before it concludes. And by concludes, I mean if there's a conflict, it doesn't always get resolved. Like in The Wild Bunch, it kind of gets resolved because a new band of posse forms, but it wasn't any of the original guys, and it's kind of sad because now we see the original guys appear in the clouds, and we liked that version of the Wild Bunch the best. So, it's been quite a night. I like that you came back to Masterclass even though we had a bit of a glitch, and we do have glitches time to time, and we'll re-record when we have glitches, and we don't mind doing it for YouTube and for Masterclass and for everyone. They're all great and fantastic in that. We'll try to get some soundtracks going to this show other than The Curse of Salem by the Dead Telluroters, but hey, it's a good bootleg album, and I think with all those bootleg albums we have, we'll keep the entertainment kind of in the background just as an effective overtone. But we saw There Will Be Blood, we saw Quiet Man, we saw Music Room, and these movies aren't really connected other than the recklessness to go cinema for the sake of cinema at all costs. That John Ford spared no expense of a Hollywood budget, one of the highest budget costs and earnings ever. Same with these movies. There Will Be Blood was a big studio hit, and that like everyone was coming out to see it, and that like it was so action packed that like 5 people die in it, but it seems like a war movie somehow, that bodies are piling up and they really aren't, but you can kind of like pretend that they are. And then this one, which was really a prophetic version of what it would be like in Bollywood film, only this time without the moral tale of an old man using his pension to pay the rock stars. So I would use my pension to buy a new copy of Hard Day's Night, but I got it over there in the stack, so I don't need to use my pension for that. We'll wait and see what disc I'm missing from the final round of Masterclass in a couple years, and we'll be like, you know what? We never went over this movie, and now's the time. So if you've got a request that you want us to talk about, we can do that because we're aligned with film criticism, and we can do pretty much most movies as far as make reviews for them, critically assess them, and by critically assessing, I'm saying, are the aesthetics and are the ideologies of the movie satisfactory? And why do I say ideologies? Because they concern the politics of representation, how the pictures are in the frame and what order they produce and question. That's why I had said with The Quiet Man, it seems to be subjugation of the woman as a theme of the movie, however, that the woman has to command the man to do what she wants done, even if it's a realm of power is given to her in an otherwise confining space, confining so much, as you would say, the Golden Fortress, till we put on the pause effect as the guy's floating above the crowd. And then it makes it look like he's flying is weird, because that's where the effect comes. But that you think, well, he's frozen in time, so of course he's flying because he's above the ground, is one way to look at it. But you could also look at it right as soon as they turn it back on, he could fall back down. But then you would say, what was he doing in midair? Just because it was a still picture of him jumping that way, and is it even possible to jump to the ground that way? And that's kind of one of those moments like Tarkovsky had in Nostalgia. I mean, in Stalker, where that kid at the end of the movie uses like telekinesis to move that cup of water across the table. It's just like, you know, my godfather, Rosh Shemeka from USC, he says, in moments like Fanny and Alexander, when their brother Ishmael is revealed as this kind of like lizard people, scary kid, he said that metaphysic was so hard of existentialism and how absurd and random chaos makes you lonely and scared. He said, that's a metaphysic that's just too much. Like, that's Seventh Seal. And he started pounding. No one was sitting in front of him, but he started pounding the back of the seat. And I think there's some movements that Music Room and Quiet Man won't really get you to those kind of metaphysical conundrums, and There Will Be Blood is realism, and Quiet Man's more of classicism. Just remember what I was talking about with the structuring metaphors of movies, and how structuring metaphors of Hard Day's Night are actual Beatles songs, and they're holding the whole storyline together, which is not done necessarily for the psychology of the Beatles, but more for what's rock superstardom done with commercializing itself to promote itself, although it is a hard rockin' thing. And that Hard Day's Night only gets surreal as much as George Harrison comes out of the floor on a machine. Do we all know the floor machine is an item that's been used in many movies. That whole idea that you can pop up from the floor. I mean, that's a James Bond gig if I ever seen one. But it grows late and we aren't quite to the structuring metaphors of other animators and how they brought those blood ballets to life in the Wild Bunch. We're not all into disguising stunts, but just remember that if in the Wild Bunch you shoot someone and they fall off of something, the edit goes back to the other footage of the gun pointing and then goes to the footage of the guy starting to fall and then goes to the footage of another portion of the frame but within the realm of the shot, and then back to the guy falling all the way, and you don't even see him hit the ground, but you just know that you've seen him twice falling, and that it's eating up a second in the manage of time to break time apart and not really sell a political propaganda, but actually do the opposite and note how savvy commercial film is now, that editing has come so far. And just the editing coming that far, like in Breathless, is the self-reflexive and structuring metaphor of its own. The production of No Closure, and even perhaps The Quiet Man, where they do get together and they are happy that they fought the battle, and it is romantic and there is a bit more happily ever after, but you don't really know what becomes of the family now that they've all fought and now that they've bricked it out. But in that one, you get the closure of happily ever after. You also get kind of a subjugation of females, only because they're only made to be pretty for man's eyes in this kind of primitive kind of way. But There Will Be Blood doesn't have much humor or romance in it either, but we don't mind because it's about oil, and everybody knows that as evil as you get, if it deals with oil, if you're an American controlling oil, we love you no matter how evil you get. We're going to support you when you destroy that church in the village. We're going to support you when you send your kid away. And we're going to support you when you have revenge on everyone, including the guy that's trying to take money from you pretending to be your brother. So just remember that There Will Be Blood in its grittiness, in its Upton Sinclair based on oil and the oil pipeline, which totally renovated the way for the oil tycoon to move in and fix those pipelines and make them work. And really, I'm going to stick by my guns that I don't mind him too much either. I mean, somebody that wants to bring me gas from Alaska to Colorado is a kind of a nice guy. And really, if he has a bad family life and has to destroy a church or two in the way, I'm not going to really get on his case about it. So we've talked about film. We've been kind of ironic about it, kind of reckless in our own definitions, but we are keeping it for the class to learn about the critical study of a film. And by critical, it's a critical eye, it's a critical ear, the critical senses, critical thinking skills that get us to the point of where we can be critical about a film and produce film criticism, which is an art of writing that, again, with CalArts, you'd have to have 12 published critical references, and that I've got 50, 100 critical references around there. And so published ones like at least 50 or 60, It's like, that was just more of who I met at USC and working connections with. But that even with those jobs, there's no closure, because you're writing about no closure in your film criticism, and it's like the company that you wrote for is still publishing your review like years later, and they're like, we use this one every once in a while. We dust this one off and bring it back out. The good thing about a class like that, or a column like that, or a class like this, is that, like, we teach films, maybe ones you've seen, maybe too much in the mainstream. Maybe I should have taught Godard's Tout Va Bien or something like that, or gone back to Gervais's tradition of quality. I mean, there's ways we could go that we could get into the avant-garde so much that we're back in Un Chien Andalou describing ants coming out of a hand, and an eye that gets cut in half. Or we could talk about the men with the movie camera and just discuss how it's propaganda, but it's not political propaganda, but it gets taken that way because all it is saying the Russia city is cool. We all know that we're not even allowed to talk about those things really among each other in serious ways, so much as we have to remain, even in a humorless way, about Russian politics is completely nil and void and nothing that we talk about anymore because politically Russia is suffering and we dare not make commentary in that direction because while the cinema of Russia has prevailed over time in so many ways, with Andrei Tarkovsky heralding the way with movies like My Name is Ivan, there's so much you can say for even some Soviet cinema like Daisies, the feminist film about the lesbians that used to do artwork and hang out in their room and paint everything. I mean, that's a great movie. It's like this boxed move to the rhythm of the editing film. But alas, I have gone 15 minutes over class. I'll tell you what, I'll give you credit for this course if you go an hour in. The information that I gave later, you might be able to use as like some kind of extra credit if the final does cover this, which it might. We did have a good discussion about the mythos and mythology of these movies, and I'm glad we got to have a masterclass tonight. I'll see you next time, and take a break because those were some pretty heavy-duty films, and maybe you should, if you're going to watch one of them right away, I'd go for The Quiet Man because there's some outdated, sexist, a little bit bordering stuff, but it's one of the it's a beautiful romance on the contradictory side of that. The beautiful romance can exist even within parameters as kind of examined by John Ford in this traditional Irish tale. At least now it is anyway.